Hi folks, it's Ben. This video we're going to be changing the shocks on a 1994 Chevy Caprice Station wagon. And while we're at it, we're going to get rid of these winter tires, and I've already gotten my summer tires all cleaned up and ready to go. So what we're going to do is pretty much just jack up the front of the vehicle and at first swap out the front shocks. We'll start with the front, and I'm doing one side at a time because it's just easier to jack it up on the side, and I pulled the wheel just for ease of access. A typical front shock consists of this. It would have two bolts that hold it on to the lower control arm, and then actually a part up here that holds it onto the frame, and there are two big rubber bushings here. Now on our car, if we look, you can see that we've got our shock in the coil right there, and if we go down to where our control arm is, you can see our two bolts that are going to be right here, and we'll reuse those. And then there's a bolt through this hole right up here, and I think it's easier on this side to actually get to it from up top here, and you can see there's the tip of the shock right there. We'll pop this off, and it should drop down through the control arm. That's part of the reason why we had to jack it up, because we actually need to pull the whole assembly out from the bottom. If you have an impact wrench, now's the time to dig it out, because getting these bolts can sometimes be kind of hard. Okay, to keep the shaft from spinning, because this part of the shock will actually spin, I put a vice grip here, and I've got it leaning up against the sway bar bushing, so that's going to keep it from turning there. Now I'm going to attack it from the top with an impact wrench, and let me show you that. This top nut we're dealing with is 9/16. Wow, she's a hot puppy. It didn't want to come off. Alright, so we got the top one undone. Now let's focus on the bottom. Now we have these two bolts. These are 1/2 inch, not 9/16 like the one on the top, and they're very tight. And I already kind of checked that one for fit, and it should come right off. We'll have to reuse these when we take them. They're dry too. Be careful with this one because our shock's going to want to come out. Thanks to gravity. And it should fall right out. We still have a rubber bushing that's kind of on the top of the frame that I didn't pull out yet. It should be kind of squished up there. But this thing should drop out. We tug and shake on it a bit. Or it'll fall right out. And there we go. Here's our old shock. Let's take a look at it. Okay, here's our old shock. You can see the rubber part and the bushing still up on the car there. I'll take off. But they look similar because they're replacement parts. This is a KBY GR2. Probably a nice shock. But like I say, it's worn out, so it's time to put new ones on. These are from Napa. They're a very basic shock, but they're better than what we had. Okay, since we're dealing with threaded objects, our two bolts below and our nut up, or bolt up top here on our shaft, let's go ahead and put some anti-seize on these, so the next time I have to change these shocks out, and because these are cheap ones, it probably won't be too long from now, we'll be able to get them out. Installing is the same as removal. Essentially you need to get your shock up through the hole. The key here is to make sure you get the top of the shock into the hole in the frame, and then we can use our bolts and reattach the bottom again. This might be a little tricky. Or not. By golly, I think I've got it on the first try. So now we might have to squish it a little bit, and we can get a bolt started. There, we'll get that one started. Start the other one, and then we can clamp them right down after I double check to make sure I'm all set on the top. Good deal. Assembly on the top is pretty easy. We take our rubber grommet, put it on top of the shaft there. Take the metal plate, we put it on top so it's like a bowl upside down. That kind of squishes the grommet to the frame. And we take our nut right here, which is kind of covered in anti-seize, and thread it on there, so we pretty much can't do it by hand. Then I'm just going to take my ratchet and make it tight enough. We've got those rubber bushings there, so they're going to kind of keep us, we want to squish them a little bit, but not a ton. And I have it now, so it's just turning the shaft, so I'll give it a quick jerks, and that'll make sure that nut won't move. And it squished the grommet against the frame. So we're good on this side. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, and then I'll meet you out back in the rear car and we'll do the rear shocks. Once we're all installed, you want to put the second nut on top of the shock, and that'll keep the first nut from backing off. That'll make sure we don't lose our shock when we're driving our car. You can just cinch it up with a wrench. Okay, the front of the car is done. We've got our summer tires on up front there. Now it's time to work in the rear. Now, what's unique about wagons and skirted Caprices of the, I think, 1991 to 92 vintage is that the shock has to allow enough travel downwards to get the wheel off, because the skirt kind of blocks the wheel. If the shock doesn't let the rear end down low enough, you might not be able to get the tire off. And since my summer tires are a little bit wider, that could be an issue. So we'll see how my parts guy did. So what we need to do now is we're going to take this tire off, and we're going to be able to see it. Now I'm told that the upper part of the shock, and in this case it's these two holes up here, the bolts are extremely hard to get to. So we'll see when we get in there exactly how tough it is. Okay, so here we are under the car. Oh, there's an exhaust thing right there. To tell you where we are, here's the rear spring. I'm looking forward. So my head is over the gas tank and my body's next to the, there's the front of the car over there, and there are my feet. Where we're shooting for is right there. It's, there's one bolt there, there's another one there, and very little clearance to get up through there. So I've got my ratchet with 2-foot extension, so we'll get up there, hopefully get on that nut, and then I have to work a wrench on top of that, and there are 2 of them up there, and hopefully break those guys free. Not fun. Okay, the first one we sheared it right apart. As you can see right here, I had my nut on there and my wrench, and she just twisted it right off. So I got to get these parts out of my tools, and we'll go back up and see if we can get the second one out. Okay, the best scenario for getting those upper bolts off was actually getting a ratchet up on top of the frame and on top of the bolt, on the bolt head, and then coming in with a long extension and a ratchet and getting the nut, and that seemed to work okay. Another note about jacking the car up is if we're undoing the shock, that also holds up the axle to an extent, so you want to make sure you get a jack stand under the axle so you don't get any unanticipated movement. The lower mount of the shock consists of a nut that you take off, you wiggle this thing off, and so your shock actually falls out. Then, and you can do that by, there's a 3/4 nut, 3/4 inch bolt on the other side. Then you have to stop this shaft from turning, and actually, using your socket on the other side, actually remove this piece. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got my clamp right here. I'm going to hold on to this guy. As soon as I get it adjusted, I'm actually going to remove this piece from the axle 2, because the one, your shock should provide you a new one, and ours is a slightly different design. Okay, unlike the front, installation on the rear is just like removal. We're going to start on the top, and I've got 2 brand new bolts that are up here. Now what I'm going to do is hold up my shock, and I'm going to just hand thread on the nuts, and we'll have it hang from here, and we'll snug all this stuff up. And to give you kind of a clue as to what I use here, I just have a regular 3/8 inch ratchet with my socket size, which happens to be 1/2 inch for these bolts, and it has enough clearance to fit on top. I can actually get a hold on top of the bolt there and actually use it to keep it from moving, and then come in with a ratchet and tighten up the nut. So my top's all set. Now I have to redo a bottom bracket here that comes with our shock kit. Now we start with our bottom assembly. You remove all your old equipment, and we're going to put in new that comes with the shock, and you actually have this long bolt that actually fits through the shock first. It's kind of a tight fit because it's a rubber, like so. And then you have a metal washer that fits over the threads. That will then, and I have to squish it up a little bit, fit there, like so. You have a lock washer. Then you have a regular nut. I have some anti-seize on this to keep it all from going. And then you essentially tighten the entire assembly together. Now, it's a 3/4 inch nut. I also have an adjustable wrench if things want to get turning on you. You can actually open it up, and this one barely fits on the flats of that special nut that you have here. And with that, we can tie that down. And I have my 3/4 inch ratchet around here somewhere, right here. And I might even have it set to tie. You bolt this in, you do the other side, and you're ready to go. So that's how you do the shocks on any car, usually pretty close to front wheel or rear wheel drive one anyway, a GM one, and especially for a 1994 Chevy Caprice wagon.